Why? Some giga, Sigdom Hanak, Skubawilk, Sitkan, Tadik, Skubit Gishk. Skakni doig sig smag laha amasak dynamic long. Skahatagan Lwan the sky, Anthony Lwai. Get wink silk will witwi, e sing pink Zagai. Lachski ni, e will sla will Zagai. Chiefs, matriarchs, ladies, gentlemen, I'd like to introduce myself as Skahat Agan. That is my traditional Niska name. It means busy beaver. My English name is Anthony Moore. I come from the Niska village of Gitwinksishk, located in northwest BC. I am from the Eagle tribe of the House of Lad. I want to start off by thanking our Creator for giving us this beautiful day and allowing us to come together. The introduction that I gave is not only for those that are viewing here on today's video, but it's also for the territory in which I'm doing this work on, in acknowledging the chiefs and matriarchs of this territory and thanking them for being on this territory and allowing us to do our business. So that was the purpose of my introduction. Today I want to talk about a couple of things specific to emergency management, more focused on opportunities in the context of emergency management, in the aspects that highlight all of the positive attributes that not only new emergency managers can focus on, but also seasoned veterans in this field. Not only to give a different perspective, because mine is mostly Northwest Coast as well as in the Okanagan of British Columbia, but these ideas that I'm bringing forward have also been asked across the country in my work with the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council. So one of the areas that I've always found important and imperative to a successful program includes increased awareness and preparedness for the types of emergencies that you're going to be dealing with. So when it comes to recent disasters, whether it's wildfire or flood or hurricanes, things like that, all those different hazards that all of us face across this country, as soon as those hazards are done, it's now in the forefront of the minds of our politicians, the minds of our elected chief and council. And that's when they start asking those questions. Are we prepared enough? Did we do enough to prepare? Is there anything we can support you with? But it's in the times that we don't have those instances going on, those large-scale disasters, that we need to be more in the mind of a salesperson, trying to sell the importance of emergency management, the importance of how we prepare, whether it's developing our plans, bringing in various types of levels of training, and also trying to combine all of that into one large exercise, and doing that over a long period of time so that the consistency is there, the continuity is there, and all of the connectedness that happens during training, especially when you're able to do something more full scale, that allows you to keep that continuity going for the emergency program itself. There's been lots of technological advances too. I'm just going to make a note for that. So preparedness itself is one of the big things I want to ensure that we remember here. And when it comes to technological advances, there's so much different opportunities that you can find when you attend conferences and workshops and receiving cold calls from companies that are looking to work with your community. They will call and provide this new innovative technology, and it's up to you and your team to disseminate whether that's going to help you or not, whether it's a GIS program or some sort of data analytics, improving disaster response and recovery over a long period of time, and will increase the efforts of your team, and it will also streamline how you respond to any type of emergency. So by incorporating different types of technologies, whether it's a multitude of laptops for each members of your command staff or your leadership group, or just incorporating the type of technology within your emergency operations center itself and how you communicate with other agencies. That can streamline how you respond and, more importantly, recover from large disasters, and preventing that longevity of some of these recovery efforts. In my mind, improving the technology reduces the amount of workload from your staff. It really creates a platform to be able to essentially, I was going somewhere with this, developing the skill within your agency, your First Nations group. And that allows for more growth in the long term. So when it comes to technological advances, you want to ensure that you have as much research as you can into these companies that approach you, and they will call you. They'll call your band office or your First Nations government office, and they will try to sell you their entire program, and it's your job to figure out if it's going to work, and more importantly, where you're going to find the money for it. So I just want to make a note of that. So I find that it's easier to do this as a team. So if you have a group or a small committee, to be able to have these conversations with to see if it'll work, that'll go a long way in ensuring that you have gone through all the information and have done your due diligence. The next big step that I always find in selling your program and ensuring that it works for your community is working with your community itself, that community engagement. So there's a growing trend towards community members getting involved in emergency management. There's been lots of growth in emergency support services, people wanting to take part, do their part, volunteer. And this allows you to bring in different types of training opportunities specifically for them, for ESS, for emergency disaster services with the Salvation Army or the Red Cross, or all these different agencies that have these volunteer opportunities to work with your community members. But I want to ensure that you understand the difference between the two. The Emergency Operations Center needs to be within your staff at your administration level, and excluding your elected officials, because that's your policy group. These things you would have learned in your EOC training in whatever capacity you've done it in. But understanding the differences between ESS and EOC is imperative so that you understand how to bring it to your community members. When it comes to the EOC and even your fire department, and them establishing their instant command posts and whatnot, everybody needs to be on the same page on how they operate within this overall structure. And so this allows you to foster a stronger sense of community resilience. your community members themselves, regardless of their age, if they're involved in the training, they're going to be themselves more prepared for an emergency. This will allow them to prepare their homes and their family members. When their kids are at school, they're going to have an emergency plan in place, hopefully to understand where their kids are going to go during an emergency if they can't contact them, a place that they'll go to muster, or a phone that they can call. They'll also have preparedness so that if there's an emergency at the home, they can handle that really quickly and be able to themselves go out and start volunteering and help with the community level response, whether it's setting up a reception center, or we're going to a home that had a house fire, or regardless of the time of day it is. And that resiliency will go a long way in the grand scheme of things, in how your community responds overall to different levels of emergencies, whether it's the house fire or a large wildfire, or even in where I come from, earthquakes, tsunamis. That is the big part of community engagement that I want to bring forward here. So having those workshops, those work sessions, where you can go to their home or bring them to a community center and sort of present them the information, but also answer a lot of the questions and the misconceptions that they will certainly have in understanding what your program is as an emergency manager, and what the fire chief does as an incident commander, and what the community does as emergency volunteers, and how those all work together. Once you have that in place, then you can start focusing on the larger scheme of things, like the climate change and resistance. So before we get to that, I just want to make sure we highlight the community engagement. So where was I? So climate change and resistance. So figuring out what your area is dealing with when it comes to climate change, and how that can contribute to more frequent disasters in your area. Typically, you can get something like this done by starting with a hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis, understanding what the hazards are, what the trends are seasonally, and things that would affect your community, like public health. You might have an opioid pandemic, you might have a measles thing coming up that's come up in BC a few times, large scale health incidents, or an increased frequency of wildfires. There's lots of areas that can be studied when it comes to climate change. And there's a strong push for developing these strategies to enhance the resilience and developing or adapting to these growing changes in climate change, and how you understand what's happening now compared to 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and understanding the trends. You can start to see the peaks where you'll have large scale disasters. And in BC, you would have seen that in the news, where we've had fires in the early 2000s. And then around the 2017, 2018 era, we had more wildfires. And then we had a little bit of a lull, almost through COVID there. And then we started to see a large trend again over the last 2-3 years, from 2024, 2025. But all in different areas. So it's all burning at different rates and in different geographical areas. And you're starting to see it in areas where it typically hasn't burned in the past. So in the northeast BC, they've had more wildfires than they have ever had in their history. So that's the long-term effects of climate change, where it's not as cold in the northern parts of British Columbia for as long as it usually is. So a typical winter when I was growing up would be from September to give or take May. That would be our entire winter season. And what has been transpiring over the last 5 years is the winter kind of comes a little bit later in late October and goes until sometimes the end of March, and that's the end of it. And then we have the wet seasons in the spring. So those are the trends that, if you start learning how they affect your geographical location, you can start planning for certain things ahead of time. Heat domes is another one that's been coming off and on throughout in recent years. It's been hotter and for longer periods of time in areas that is typically experiences hot weather already. The Okanagan, for example, had a huge heat spell where it ruined all of their crops. And if you know the Okanagan, they are a farming valley, whether it's fruits and vegetables or wine for their region. And they had a detrimental effect from heat domes. So when it comes to the climate change, trying to find a company that is sufficient in understanding how to plan for them will allow you to build your response plans accordingly. Now, with all these things that are going on, all these things like the community engagement and the climate change, finding the technologies, all this needs to be coming from somewhere when it comes to money, right? So funding and resources. Governments and organizations are recognizing the need for robust emergency management programs. No longer can we do this on the side of our desk, which is what we've all been doing for many, many years. We need the funding for a dedicated emergency program coordinator who can plan for and seek funding for all of these different programs that are necessary for your program to be successful. And there's been an increase in funding for training, for research, and infrastructure from the federal government, from Indigenous Services Canada. And that has allowed us to develop our programs in ways we've never had an opportunity for over the last 20 years. The last 5 years in particular have allowed our programs to grow, where more and more communities now have a dedicated emergency program coordinator, and it's their job typically to build a team around themselves and start applying for grants, start applying for funding, developing those resources by attending conferences and building networks. Grants themselves can be very difficult to work through, but I've always found myself, especially when it comes to, and I'll use BC as an example because that's my area of expertise. We use the Union of BC Municipalities, UBCM. All the funding from the federal government flows through them for grants for EOC, for fire, for ESS, climate change, and whatnot. All those can be found on their website. And the application process can be very onerous at times. You need to be a great wordsmith in understanding how to write the information that you're trying to share with them in what you're dealing with, what your specific geographical location is dealing with in terms of the types of hazards that affect your community, and how this funding is going to help that. So in terms of EOC, and I'll go there specifically, when it comes to finding funding for an EOC, there's so much different directions that you can go. And you need to figure out by analyzing and researching what your community has responded to in the past and how they reacted to those responses. That will give you a baseline in, has that worked? Has that not worked? Why not? And from there, you can start to develop where you're going to go next. So if you have a full, robust EOC team that's dedicated to each position within your org chart, then that part is covered. You can check that box off. Then you need to go to what's the level of training for each of them. Do they all have training for their specific function? So if you have somebody from land and resources or natural resources, are they in your operations section function? And if so, are they very familiar what they'd be doing in that area? If you have social development, for example, who's really good at networking and acquiring resources, they could be in your logistics, for example. And this could be different for everybody else. Everyone has a different skill set for the departments they work in. But this is what I've seen in the past, where these specific types of departments have a skill set that's translatable or transferable to the EOC function. So if you've got them all trained up to a certain area, then you can focus on a different area of funding where you develop your emergency operations center, starting with your emergency response plan. Is it robust enough? Do you have a recent HRVA? And do those have the relevant information such as contact information and demographics for your community? If it doesn't, then that's the next step, logical step that you should probably consider in where you go with your funding. Once that's all done and you have your plans all set, then you go to your EOC itself. What can you do to make your EOC more streamlined so that it can set up? Most communities that I've been in, their boardroom is one long table. And when you do EOC exercises, typically you try to break out into different sections. Hard to do if you got one table for a large room. So maybe consider changing that table to ones that can separate and move around to be a little more flexible in how it's designed. There's other ones where the table itself has technology in it where you can raise it up and add power to it and so on. And then you can go to touchscreen projectors or TVs that connect directly to your devices through dongles and things like that, or to be able to streamline what's going on the outside, getting updates from BC Wildfire or the River Forecast Center and things like that, and allowing all of that information that you need to help you make decisions, be able to see it all come at once. So you have like 4 or 5 TVs up in your EOC, all displaying different information constantly and updating very constantly. So having a good idea where you're going with your funding and getting that buy-in from your leadership team on that funding, because you're going to need their buy-in and their approval, especially when it comes to UBCM in applying for those. So as your program starts to grow, you should probably start considering as the next big thing as career advancement. So offering more specific field training for certain people, developing roles in leadership in policy making, specialized areas such as cybersecurity and global health emergencies, so that all those departments that you need to be able to work in your EOC will grow in their capacity to be able to support the EOC itself during large-scale emergencies. And by improving the level of skill and the level of knowledge within your team will build experience, and that will allow the team itself to grow as a large conglomerate and keep your program expanding. Because as soon as you stop learning, as soon as you stop exercising, as soon as you stop using the information, you start to regress, right? You start losing the information or losing that skill in understanding how to keep your program efficient. Furthermore, there's been a lot of community members that have stepped into an emergency management role simply through basic training. They've taken an EOC Essentials course, and they have only done a handful of emergencies. So one of the next big things I would like to talk about is advancement in education. So being able to leave your home for a period of time, or sometimes you can do it fully online. Depends where you go for your training. But if you take an accredited course through the Justice Institute, through the College of the Rockies, or Thompson Rivers, or any other large institute across the country that focuses a education program in emergency management, that will give you the educational background that can expand your emergency management program by providing higher level of training and educational opportunities to enhance your skills, to enhance your level of expertise. And once you've taken those steps, the level of trust from your community members that you've gone out and gotten an education in this, and it wasn't just a short-term course, then that allows you to help build emergency programs within your own organization and not have to hire out every time. You can build your own evacuation program. You can conduct your own HRVA programs on your own, or you get more experience in your funding. You can find the wording to be able to acquire more funding from Indigenous Services Canada. You can, instead of getting the $30,000, $40,000 grants, you can get $80,000, $125,000 grants to expand your program into larger scale short-term programs that can have a huge positive impact on your program. So, researching which institution you want to get your schooling from is going to have a bunch of factors. Obviously, the geographical location to where you live will have an impact. So if I live in the northwest of BC and the college is in Vancouver, the costs of living in Vancouver and trying to go to school there are so high, it's always not feasible. And places like JIBC have understood this. So what they've done over the last 10 years is try to make a lot of their programs online. That gives them the flexibility to deliver their courses to communities that are very isolated and very remote. And when they do have to do something in person, it would be done as a group. You do a group of 4 or 5 courses in a row consecutively, allowing it to be just one trip as opposed to multiple. Now that's one way of doing it. And then there's the other institutes across the country that provide different options, and it's up to you to decide which one is more of a benefit for you and more cost effective. They all have their different price costs and level of commitment necessary to be able to do it. So if you're still working full time while you're trying to get your education, obviously taking off all the time isn't going to be feasible unless it can be done in times where you would be typically not dealing with a lot of emergencies, but that's hard to plan for. So having the online option definitely allows you to delineate when you do your courses to when you're opposite of when you're very busy. The last big topic that I want to bring forward is crisis innovation. So the crisis often drives innovation in products and services and in strategies. Emergency management professionals play a crucial role in harnessing the innovation of improving systems and strategies for future uses. In allowing this growth in services and strategies, and I'll use COVID as an example. COVID forced a lot of us to isolate ourselves, forced us a lot of us to reduce our social bubble. Remember those fun words. And the innovation that came from that in allowing businesses and organizations to operate through video conferencing has really changed the game in how most businesses operate. Now, is that a positive for the long term? Maybe not. Some people have really liked working from home now. It's hard to do that as an emergency program coordinator. Myself, I was in the office through COVID, dealing with it as the boots on the ground and the planner and whatnot for my nation. But finding a way to make the innovation work for your community and understanding the strategies that people have developed and make those strategies work for you will go a long way in how you innovate your program, keep your level of information that you're sharing with your committee members, your personnel on your org chart, keeping them interested in staying in your program and interested in continuing the exercises, because over time, complacency will set, right? That happens very quickly if you don't keep up with the times, let's say. And how you keep that interest, that level of interest at a high level, requires a lot of innovation on your part as an emergency coordinator or as an emergency manager, to ensure that what you're working on is relevant for the current times, is relevant for what may be coming in the future, and finding the funding to make sure those can keep going. So these emerging opportunities and shifts in perspective provide outlook for future emergency management. So as communities and organizations face the different levels of adversity, you want to look at specific programs and certifications and ways to evolve your emergency program so that you can feel free to expand, look in different areas, and be continuously innovative and seek out new ideas. And one last thing is building the network, using all of all of these topics that I brought forward, and having a network to discuss all of these things will allow you to see what other people have tried to implement, what worked, what didn't work, what's a good new practice, what is one that you probably stay away from because it did this and it had a negative impact on your personnel. So hopefully some of these ideas will give you a little bit of background in areas that you can think about developing and discussing with your team, and then take your program to the next level.